The things I talk about and some of the images I show may be potentially triggering, and if at any point you feel as though you need to leave the room and take care of yourself, I strongly encourage you to do so. So coverage of sexual assault cases in the media has broadened our national conversation about sexual assault and the ways in which we deal with it or do not deal with it. And these conversations have introduced people to a term, rape culture. And this term basically aims to encompass the larger structural factors that contribute to a society which, as bell hooks writes, condones and celebrates rape. And one of the factors people cite in this rape culture is the idea of impunity, that in our culture, there's no punishment for sexual violence, and if there is, it's not harsh enough. So the Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network released a study in that out of every 100 rapes, only 3 rapists will spend even a single day in prison. And this is an important statistic, but it's not the entire picture. There are many other cultural factors that contribute to rape culture, and one of them is socialization around gender norms and gender expressions. So men are taught to be sexually aggressive, and they're taught that they should always want sex, when in reality, this norm erases and invalidates the experiences of male survivors of sexual violence. Women, on the other hand, are taught to be the gatekeepers of their sexuality, and that it's their job to tell men no when they go too far. For people who are transgender and gender nonconforming, their difference is cited as the reason for their experiences of violence, and their cases are often dismissed or ignored. And in all of this, our society never actually teaches people what rape is. In the Steubenville, Ohio case, a witness was asked why he didn't intervene when he witnessed the assault, and he said, "It wasn't violent. I didn't know exactly what rape was. I always pictured it as forcing yourself on someone." And this is what was happening when he chose not to intervene, because he didn't recognize this as rape. So incarceration is put forth as the band-aid solution to these larger cultural and structural problems, but this ignores the larger problems in our prison system itself. So this is the United States federal prison population, and this is showing a 500% increase in our prison population over the past 30 years. And we are the leader in incarceration. We have 2.2 million people in our nation's prisons and jails. But among this population, it's increasing in very racist ways. So for white men, there's a 1 in 17 likelihood that you'll be in prison, and for black men, it's a 1 in 3 likelihood that you'll be in prison in your lifetime. And this isn't because one demographic commits more crimes than the other. It's because our prison system is racist. As you can see in this article from Feministing, which if you know me, I live for Feministing, I literally check it every day. The headline is, "Rich white man gets no jail time for raping his 3-year-old daughter because he will not fare well in prison." So basically, in his case, his lawyer argued that because he's rich and because he's white, he'll be a target of violence in prison. But obviously, prisons are violent places, and we're setting up this kind of hierarchy where we deem certain types of people worthy of experiencing violence and others not. So the prison industrial complex, as defined by Critical Resistance, which is a prison abolition group, is the overlapping interests of government and industry that use surveillance, policing, and imprisonment as solutions to economic, social, and political problems. And I love this image because I think it illustrates it really well. And the most recent case I can think of that really illustrates this idea of a prison industrial complex is that of James Murdoch, a homeless veteran in New York City who had mental illness problems and was addicted, and he was arrested for sleeping on the stairs of a public housing project in Harlem on a cold night where he was just trying to find somewhere to sleep. And in Rikers Island, in his cell, he baked to death when his prison cell reached temperatures of over 100 degrees, and it took over 3 hours for guards to find him in his cell. Prisons always have budgets to operate. Programs such as homeless shelters and schools are constantly having their budgets cut. If there was funding for homeless shelters and programs that dealt with addiction, maybe James Murdoch could have been sent to one of these instead of being sent to prison, where he ultimately died. We know prisons are places of sexual violence because our culture has reduced this to a joke. And sexual violence, obviously, this is a common thing people joke about, don't drop the soap. It's a joke about prison rape. We know it happens because we've reduced it to a joke. And this is an article from The Onion, but I think it really illustrates well what's happening in prisons. We send people who've committed crimes of sexual violence, violent crimes, to a hyper-violent environment where they're likely to become victims of sexual violence themselves. And instead of addressing the root structural problems that cause sexual violence, we're creating new victims of this problem, which just causes a cycle of violence. So one alternatives to prison, in especially cases of sexual and domestic violence, is the abuse intervention programs, and these basically address the socialization aspect of rape culture, and they address masculinity, healthy relationships, and they basically make people take accountability for the violent behaviors they have. An issue with abuse intervention programs is they're not really seen as legitimate by a lot of judges, and judges have the power to decide whether or not they're used in a case. So basically, there's this narrative being put forth that there's only a small number of people who commit violent sexual crimes, and that if we put all those people in prison, it will never happen again. So it's a very individualistic approach that doesn't take into account that these people come from the same culture we do, and they're exposed to the same media we are, and if we could take that into account when coming up with sentencing ideas, maybe these programs would gain more traction. So in an article titled "Don't Criminalize College Responses to Sexual Violence," Alexandra Bradsky, who's a writer for Feminist Day and an organizer of Know Your 9, which is a group that aims to inform college students of their rights under Title IX, writes about the importance of not making the criminal justice system very present in college campuses in dealing with sexual violence. And one alternative she puts forth is the use of civil cases. And she acknowledges that these cases can seem kind of crude because it seems almost at first that you're putting on a price on an individual's suffering. But she also notes that the damages won in these cases can be used to move out of an abusive partner's home, to pay for therapy, or to pay to finish school. And she writes, "We can make it easier for victims to sue their assailants in civil court or integrate community models such as collective intervention with civil law protections." So basically, again, if we move away from this idea that prison is going to fix sexual violence, we can begin to expand on other alternatives. And then the other idea she puts forth, which is particularly relevant to everyone in this room today, is strengthening college responses to sexual violence. Because reporting a sexual assault on a college campus is a unique process in the sense that you have the option to involve the police if you want to, and to not involve the police if you don't want to. And if you don't want to involve the police, there's already an internal civil procedure that's set up. And she writes, "We cannot fix university educating systems by outsourcing the work to a structure even more deeply flawed and resistant to reform." So while it's going to be very time-consuming and difficult, and it's going to be a process that's ongoing to develop a sexual assault policy that meets the needs of everyone in the community, it's going to be a lot easier than trying to fix the entire criminal justice system in the United States prison system. So if we want to begin to develop non-carceral alternatives to sexual assault, we can begin right here at Wheaton. If we really want to end sexual and domestic violence, we need to take into account the larger structural factors that allow this violence to contribute and make sure our proposed solutions don't strengthen other structures of violence. And we can begin developing these non-carceral solutions today at Wheaton. Yay, Wheaton. So, yay, I'm